So I'm Brandon Phillips.
I'm Jess Frazelle.
And what we're going to be talking about today is, like I said, the Kubernetes security process, particularly the release process. And then we're also going to talk about first, initially, why this release process came to be and what the importance is of doing this, particularly in open source software. We'll be kind of tag teaming. Jess will be freestyle rapping the whole time. All right, so here are the major points. I'm going to initially do some context setting, then we're going to talk through open source and security disclosure as a concept and as a topic, then how we arrived as co-authors of the Kubernetes process, and then finally how you can get involved. I'm sure you're all going to remember this, so you'll definitely want to get follow up after. So context setting, computer security in 2017. Why is security important at all? Why is it even part of our discussion? I like to put it this way. We've built the world's most secure computer, right? We did that a long time ago. They're not network connected. Physical input, visual output, easy. But actually today's systems are all network connected, and so security is all about ensuring that whatever is connected to the network doesn't have any bugs in it. And if something does happen, where a bug is found on the network, exposable via the network, you have to do something about it, and you have to do something about it very rapidly, because this is essentially the feeling that we all get when a 0-day comes out of a system that we're maintaining. This is Apple engineers finding out about an iPhone vulnerability, but I think we've all been in an empathetic position before. And this is where the name of the talk comes from, is that we're constantly teetering on this edge of a volcano, where on one side we may fall in because of a security vulnerability, and then on the other side we may fall down the mountain because we don't have processes in place to actually deal with the security vulnerability. And we're constantly afraid of the unstableness that lies on the other side of the volcano. All right, so server security, why is it important? I really like to set the context that there's 3.5 billion internet connected people in the world today, and there are 30 million of us in the world, IT and software practitioners. If you do the math, it doesn't look good for us, and we have to be very leveraged with what we do. Also some people say, well, maybe we'll catch up. We'll just train more software engineers up. I don't think the numbers look good here either. About 250 million people are added to the internet every year if this trend continues. So why is it important? It's because everyone's data is moving onto servers. This is the dominant paradigm of today. I know a lot of us as software engineers, as people who care about privacy, et cetera, don't like this paradigm philosophically, but it has won in the market, and to a large degree we're responsible for the systems that put everyone's documents, commerce, and communications onto a server somewhere. And so estimated worldwide, there's about 100 million servers. There's 30 million of us. So that's 3 per person. Who here maintains 3 servers? All right, so the numbers might be a little bit off. And that's because at larger organizations, people end up maintaining way more than 3 servers. So if you take the rough estimate of Google, I know they have a couple million servers, and then they have about 40,000 people in this sort of role, then they're maintaining way more per person than on average. Which leads us to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is designed to maintain lots of servers, and therefore if we want a secure internet, we need a secure Kubernetes, which leads us to our security process. So open source and security disclosure. Handing it over to Jess.
Nice. Yeah, so we basically started considering what we should do for Kubernetes open source security disclosure. And this leads down kind of a rabbit hole, but you want an open process. It's an open source project, but you also need a way that people won't find out about the bugs and use them in a bad way, but we can let vendors know, and vendors won't break embargo, which we actually had a problem with one vendor breaking embargo when I was at Docker, and we had to do the release right away because of it. And so it's hard to kind of keep this balance, but you can have both, and make Iron Man here happy. So there's a bunch of different rabbit holes that you can go down. GPG is one of them. Like some security researchers want to send you encrypted, messages about the vulnerability and the details of it. Some don't care. And then it leads down, do you want the entire security team to share one GPG key, which is a little bit scary? Do you want to post, your individual GPG keys and then they have to email everyone? So there's kind of like a nice balance here too that you can decide on as far as encryption of the process as well. And then you have to try making everyone happy, which this is one of my favorite gifts for opinions on things. So you have the researchers, you have the community, and you have the vendors, and all the sides kind of have their own priorities of what they want from this process, So the users, you obviously don't want bugs in your code, you don't want malicious people on your servers because an O-Day never got fixed. You also want to be able to upgrade without this thing taking down your entire cluster and everything with it. And then also you want to be able to know when security fixes are there so that you can upgrade and you can act on them accordingly, based off how severe it is, if you need to upgrade then, if you need to know about it ahead of time because you have literally so many servers exposed that you don't know what to do with it. Oops. Oh, so then you have also the researcher or, original reporter's expectation, which I tried to talk to a few of my friends and they were like, we just want to know what's happening. Because apparently most vendors don't tell you anything. You'll try to report it and they'll just be either we don't care or it just goes into some null void somewhere and you never hear about it again. And that's when they start doing these public disclosures without them fixing the bug, which is a problem. So they're just ack it when you get it, then give us updates randomly, and maybe they aren't emailing us every single month what's happening with it. We're actually giving them updates as things happen. And then there's the project expectations, which is us, which is cool. So obviously we want bugs to be fixed quickly. We want embargo to be kept secret so that we aren't rushed with the disclosure. And then we want upgrades to happen and remain seamless and not break people so that we don't have issues on top of issues when we fix things. And then also want to actually keep and instill users' trust along the way. So there's also a bunch of problems with getting people to upgrade. You have to make sure people know whether this is over mailing lists, Twitter, carrier pigeon. So there's a bunch of different factors involved here, and kind of the project itself has to establish a pattern that people get used to, and then you have to continue that pattern so that it is consistent and people can consistently know that they need to upgrade. And then there's also what you have to do in terms of handling it if it's super severe. Kind of one of my personal worst fears is if there's a bug and then people name a nickname after it because it's so bad. So now we're gonna kind of play a game.
Yeah, so I wanted to play this game really quick. I'm gonna call on people, so raise your hands. I'm gonna ask for each of these what the piece of software was that was vulnerable and then the name of the vulnerability. And so we'll go from left to right. So if somebody want to answer the first one?
That's OpenSSL Heartbleed.
Yes, correct. We also ordered awesome gifts for this. They're still being manufactured and will be shipped to my office in San Francisco in about a month. So sorry. Somebody want the next one, the middle one? Anybody?
Wow.
Ghost Shell? Yeah, what was the piece of software? Bash. Okay, great. Nice. And then the very last one. Dirty Cow.
Nice.
Yep. And that was in the Linux kernel? Yeah? Yep. Cool. Yeah, so we're getting that branding game on point in security. So.
Yeah, everything needs a fun name except the bugs that affect anything of mine. So there's also a bunch of problems with how bugs themselves get reported. Sometimes it's a security researcher who actually knows this process and kind of knows the means, and so they'll be I found a bug. Should I be evil or should I let Upstream know? Or they'll Google our security disclosure policy, or they'll just straight up email security which is where I forward all my Apple phishing emails to, which I realized was actually a thing. I asked someone one day. So they can look it up, but the problem like lies when people don't realize kind of what the bug severity is. So they think it's just a bug, but the underlying issue could cause all these like problems with access to data and stuff like that. So they'll file an issue on the repo. And this is how mistakes happen. And you need someone almost to recognize right away that that is a problem. And we had this happen several times on Docker. One of the times I actually had to call a friend at GitHub and be like, delete this issue, which actually then becomes super sketch. So there's kind of like also a balance here where, whether it's, changing the issue content and letting the original reporter know the severity and why you changed it first, or, just kind of slowly shoving it under the rug until you can fix it and make it like a thing that is then publicly disclosed. So we learn a lot from other communities, and I'll pass it back to Brandon to start.
Yeah, so one of the things before like just designing a process in vacuum, we wanted to go through some of the communities that we respect. Like Jess spent a lot of time in the Docker community, and I've spent some time in other communities. So just going to give you a survey of some of the lessons that we included in the Kubernetes security process that we learned from others and attribute them. So there's a bunch of just common best practices that everyone should really follow in these security processes. The first is, this was the most frightening, was initially when I started looking at the Kubernetes release process, is you couldn't actually find Kubernetes security disclosure as the top hit on Google, which is not good because it's the first place people are going to go to find your process. The next piece is to have a dedicated response team and to ensure that they're all coordinated via the email list. There's a lot of like discussion on like maybe we should all be using WhatsApp and like all on Tor or whatever, but mailing lists are effective and it gets to people's primary communication path quickly. Having internal documentation about the process so that it's clear who actually owns something once it comes to the list. Having a security leveling system so that you can say, at least through some rough metric, how severe this is and talk about it in an objective way. Everyone will naturally say that their bug is the worst thing ever found ever, and just having some communication around that is super important. And then requesting CVEs when it's appropriate. The CVE process is super confusing, and in a lot of cases you want to just ask for the CVE after everything's been publicly disclosed. All right, so.
Yeah. So with Docker, it was really nice. We tried to make sure the entire process was documented in the open source repo, and that almost anyone like who kind of just stepped in one day, they could be like, I can right now this day do a security release, which is important if like the one person goes out of town. And then there's like tooling for everything. All the scripts to build and release Docker can be run, anywhere at any time by anyone. Really, all you need are the GPG keys to sign, which like all the main team members have. But other than that, like anyone can do the release at any time, which is huge.
So this is something that I learned from Greg Hartman and the Linux kernel. One thing that often you'll get into binds with security researchers where they'll ask to essentially negotiate the timelines. They'll disclose it to you, say they'd like to have it fixed, but then they're going to be giving a sweet talk at CCC or something 8 months from now. And it's like you can't actually allow a known security vulnerability to sit around until the researcher's paper comes out or it's convenient for them. So this is something that the Linux kernel stays by, and they set expectations up front. If you disclose it to us, we will process it within the order of weeks, so less than a month, and get it in front of users as a fix. Another one that I thought was really interesting and I hope to do in the future with Kubernetes is Node.js has a core security team and then a community security team that actually helps all the ancillary projects that make Node.js successful have a good security process. This is really, really cool because inside of Kubernetes, it's not just Kubernetes core that people are running. They're going to be running networking systems and storage systems and a bunch of other containers that don't necessarily come out of the Kubernetes Git repo. And it's something that we should definitely start to think about as the sort of franchise of Kubernetes grows and grows.
So with Go, what I really liked was that they'll email, this like Go announce mailing list, which is basically the equivalent of our announce. And they'll say, we have a security vulnerability, and in a week or so, we're going to release this dot version with it, so that we ourselves could prepare our own projects to upgrade, and we kind of like knew like impending doom is coming, kind of, which is nice. And then they have this on their security release page. They have like a super small team. It's really just like Andrew Duran and Adam Langley, and their email addresses are there with their GPG keys. So you can, just go straight to them, depending on the severity, or, they'll see that faster than with any sort of mailing list. And it's super nice that you know exactly who's on there to handle your issue right away.
Yeah, this is something that I've found for a lot of like disclosure processes, whether like code of conduct disclosures or security disclosures, listing explicitly the people who are behind that list is really important, because you may want to track them down on Twitter, you may want to have a face-to-face conversation with them, etc. And so I think it's just in general, mailing lists that are like, this is a team, should list who's on the team. Cool. So next up, we're going to go through the kind of process that we actually landed on. I'll cover the actual normal release process, and then Jess will walk through the fancy security process that we just tested for the first time. Okay. So Kubernetes normal release process, we actually have a really, really sophisticated release process. If people aren't familiar with it, for an open source project, it's extremely mature. So at any given point, we have 3 minor releases of Kubernetes flying at the same time. And there's release managers for each one of these. So you're release manager for 1.5, is that correct?
1.4. Yeah.
1.4. And there's a release manager for each of these. So we have 3 minor releases that are getting bug fixes and security patches, and that gives users roughly about 9 to 12 months of security patches. If they like deployed 1.5, they'll have about 9 to 12 months before the security patches stop going to 1.5 and they need to move to 1.6. And then this whole process is maintained by a set of volunteers that actually build the release, take the cherry pick, review the thing, and run the process. Yeah, so that's all about 9 months. And then for each of the minor releases, we actually have this whole process, which Dan Gillespie from CoreOS just got 1.6 out the door yesterday. But it's actually a big team effort of a big schedule with these quarterly releases of Kubernetes, where we have a set of alphas and betas and RCs, and then finally a final release. And it takes about six weeks or so to run through the full process. And the teams, we have a very sophisticated set of people who make these releases possible. It goes all the way from the release manager, who is overseeing and is ultimately accountable for on-time successful release. But a ton of people make these things possible, and it's a set of volunteers that do all this work. So you have people who are wrangling the features so that we know actually what's in the release. We have people who are writing any of the documentation for migrations or deprecations or things that would actually affect users moving from one release to the other. We have people who are accountable for testing to ensure that all the automated tests are passing. There's very brave souls that do manual testing to ensure that actually the product works as expected, not just that the tests are all green. Which is pretty critical, because at the end of the day, a human has to use it, and so on and so forth through the whole release process. And so there's about 8 folks that made this 1.6 release possible, and it's dedicated work. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks of just hard work of all you're doing is focusing on release success. So if anyone wants to volunteer for these positions, these are open positions, and as I've just walked through, they're extremely glamorous. And so how we actually get to a successful release, I like this diagram. This is a diagram that used to be on kubernetes.io on the front page. I like it because it makes Kubernetes look really complex. There's like a lot of stuff in there. And so the importance that I want to highlight here is that there is actually a lot of stuff in Kubernetes. And to get to these successful releases, there's a lot of testing that happens. If you've never visited the Kubernetes test grid, it's actually pretty inspiring how many tests, how rigorous those tests are, and against all the platforms that we do it. I think there's about like 20 or so different configurations and platforms that end up in the test grid, and that's not counting all the other projects around Kubernetes that also test it outside of just the normal. Every Git check-in gets this whole service. So.
Sweet. So now I'll cover our shiny new process, which we did just use, and it's get in there. It totally worked in the end. The first thing, of course, is the bug being reported. So this is through our disclosure process, which we have the mailing list. We have all our individual emails if necessary. We also have like GPG keys there as well. And it's on, kubernetes.io/security. Very easy to find, hopefully in the SEO now. And yeah, security researchers can hopefully get right there. So within 24 hours, we'll form this kind of fix team that has like the experts in this area that the bug affects. So like if it's in, the SIG node, we'll contact whoever we need to contact there. And those engineers will be involved from the start, like discussing fixes and, going over how this should be fixed, how severe it is, and everything like that. And this will all be done on a private repo that we have set up. And all the patches are posted there, they're reviewed there, and everything kind of happens there until, we're ready. And we also have like all of CI basically set up there, which was super hard to do because a ton of the CI scripts, of course, are built around one repo and not like a private one. So there's that. So within like 1 to 7 days, we'll be at this point. And then this is kind of where we'll give this like warning sign to like brace for impact. And it will go out to like either Kubernetes announce or security announce, depending on the severity and stuff like that. So we'll just kind of let people know what's coming so that they can know that they're going to have to eventually upgrade their cluster. So at this point, we'll also, if the bug is critical enough, we'll let vendors know so that they can either upgrade early or even like review patches to make sure that it's not going to break their infrastructure. That way we are ensured that upgrades are, consistent and keeping everything still working. So if it's super severe, we'll definitely do this honestly, if you think like your vendor should be on this mailing list, you should probably find one of us after so that we can make sure. And then within 21 days, we'll cut the release from the private repo and then post the patches to the public repo right after. The binaries are available. This was always the part that gave me anxiety at Docker because there's like this 2-second interval where like the release is out, but the patches aren't public, and it like stresses me out. This is super weird. So and a bunch of this is like redoing the release script, which we'll circle back to later when we ask for help in the end. So there's actually this like entire spec for scoring different CVEs based on the severity. And right now it's like version 3.0, but like at the time of Heartbleed, it was 2.0. And it takes all these things like into account. So like attack vectors, authentication, confidentiality. So like if your data is like going to be, disclosed and that was not something that should happen, that's definitely there. So you can kind of score, and then it will calculate this number for you out of 10. So just to give some examples, like Heartbleed, and this was on an old scoring system, which is, I almost think it's like spurned 3.0, but I was like reading all these opinionated blog posts, so I cannot confirm that. It was a 5 out of 10, which is weird because like Heartbleed was super bad, right? So I read I kind of went down this rabbit hole of like why. So it turns out like the old scoring method kind of didn't take into account that it attacked all these systems. Like so many people had to upgrade that day. It was like a huge thing. And people were like successfully exploiting it on people's systems that they did not upgrade. And it is very easy to exploit. So I think after this were like, we need to like redefine the wheel. So to give a better example, Dirty Cow was the 7.8, which actually kind of seems like it fits. It affected the kernel. You can get out, but you do need to also have like local access to do that. So we have like several areas of improvement. So if you are willing to help out, we'll go over those.
So the first kind of big area for improvement is that this is challenging work. Jess kind of underplayed it, but there was 4 people, including Jess, leading, getting the CI/CD system set up, building all the test infrastructure so that we can actually test these security releases. And that's super not glamorous work. And so 1, recruiting people, and then 2, rotating and ensuring that we constantly have new people being involved in the process is going to be really important for the longevity. Processes that stagnate are not good for any open source community. And this one's particularly tricky because it's not really public. So some of the challenges is that you're responsible for non-public work. Non-public work is not glamorous in open source communities. Some of the incentives that we've come up with is that 1, you can say that you've involved in the team. It's publicly documented on the security page that this product security team is responsible for the successful rollout of security updates. And we all know who here is using Kubernetes. We all know how important it is intrinsically to the entire ecosystem. The other bit is that we have these lead positions who actually are in charge of taking the vulnerability from disclosed to public. And they do get credit by being the person who mails the emailing list, the announce list, et cetera, about the vulnerability. The big thing that we need to do here is that we actually don't have a way of electing a new product security team. It was kind of just made up of the ragtag rogue team that came together, and we all just said, we're going to take care of this process. But it'd be really nice if we had new ways of people volunteering and getting involved and holding them accountable to ensuring this is well led.
Yeah, and then there's also ways to improve the communication to users. So I think this will be a process that we iterate over almost every single time that we have a vulnerability that we need to disclose, because you never know how many people you're really getting to know the message without coming up with some cheeky branding for it. So whether it's mailing list, making announcements, sending out on Twitter, and then also deciding based on the severity, which luckily we can use that calculator, if it should even be handled on the private repo or if it should go public. There were several instances in the past with Docker where we, someone would open an issue in the public, like I said, but also we realized that it wasn't really that bad severely, so we just would fix it in the public, do a release, and you're done. So if it's really not that severe, it doesn't need to go through this entire elongated process, but I think it's kind of getting through these things and learning exactly how we want to do it to get there. Yeah.
Cool. So the last bit, and before we turn it over to questions, is how you can help out. So it's pretty simple. You need to actually do something. So a lot of the challenges that we have today are around the test infrastructure. Some of the other challenges that we have are around processes. We've really been the only ones to audit the process and test it and ensure that we're leveraging as many best practices as we can find. So if you want to really help out, the first is that we need you to all join Kubernetes Announce. All this work, as Jess said, is meaningless if nobody actually upgrades. And so Kubernetes Announce is where you actually find out about these vulnerabilities. The next bit is actually reviewing the process. So the process is all public in Git. I'd love to have feedback. You can email Jess or I directly, or you can bring it up on Kubernetes Dev on ways that can be improved. There's an ongoing thread about governance, which I haven't looked at this week because it's up to 60 people. So I'm afraid. But
I just started drama on it. So.
Good. So just actively looking and seeing if the way that Kubernetes is being managed as a community is a way that you feel like it should be managed. And then, yeah, I already gave a pitch to this, but I'll just do it again. Test Info repo is maintained by a small set of very brave engineers, and it is the backbone of the project. I think that we would not be here today if Kubernetes was seen as an unstable project. A lot of us very confidently, even pre-1.0, put Kubernetes in production, and to a large degree, it's because of the work that happens in this repo. All right.
Sweet. Yay. So that was it.